There, the session is being recorded on asking the right question. So if you are listening to the recorded version, then obviously you won't be able to post any questions, but you can certainly contact me directly at the Manitoba School Boards Association after you've run through it, and I can hopefully get back to you. As well, whether you're listening here today or listening to a recording, and if your whole board isn't here, or if you'd like a more individualized session in person or online, you can contact me to make arrangements for that as well. As we switch between the different areas of the webinar, it may take a couple of seconds for the screen to load, or you'll hear silence for a moment, but just bear with me and it'll come up fairly quickly. As with previous presentations, what I usually do is start out with a short poll, which I'm going to do here. And if you'd like to answer some of those questions for me, I'd appreciate it. It helps me just to get to know you all a little bit better and helps me tailor the presentation just a little bit. So take a few moments and click on your answer there. Again, as with previous presentations, other people won't be seeing the results. So just go ahead and put in whatever works for you. I'll give you a couple of minutes there. And as you're answering that, I'll just mention too that if you are coming into the webinar for the first time, then what usually happens is I'll start it off with some music just so that you know that you are into the site and it is live. If you do hear the music there, then it means that I'm also on the webinar and have got things going. So there we go. I'm just going to start up my webcam. Hi everybody. I hope you can all see me, and we'll go on to the main part of the presentation then. So while this webinar may be aimed more at new trustees or those who are perhaps in their first term, you may also be here as a more experienced trustee, and that's not a bad idea either. It's a chance to look at new ways to approach board issues and decisions. You might want to make sure that you are basing your decisions on the right things, and that involves knowing the right questions to ask. I know some of you have had a lot of practice, but maybe it's just a chance to look at a new way or a new approach to a question, a way you can bring focus to your or your board's objectives. Whatever it is, welcome, and I hope you can find a few nuggets that you can make use of. Just so you can concentrate and look at the slide there, I'll turn this off for a moment. So if you are new to the school board, or if you want to think back to your very first few meetings, I can imagine that some of your first thoughts were along the lines of, I don't even know what they're talking about, let alone a question to ask about it. If you are, or how you start learning about the issues before the board is often figuring out the right questions to ask, and it takes practice to know the material, to be able to think about it in the right way, or in a particular, I guess at the right level. Formulate your answers or your questions so that you can get the answers that you need, and think about what direction you need to give based on what you now know. This is all part of being a confident and contributing board member, and these are some of the areas that we are going to cover today. I'll start that up again. And so knowing the material, this sounds really basic, but there are some things that can trip you up. So just like taking the time necessary to absorb the material. This comes back to the idea that whoever told you that being a school trustee is just a matter of a couple of meetings a month is perhaps exaggerating, and a lot. I'm sure if you've been here for a while, you realize it's more than that. So skimming the board package for half an hour before you go to sleep at night is likely not going to give it the justice it deserves, and it'll leave you perhaps asking the wrong questions, or perhaps none at all. So taking the time may also depend on how your board meeting package is set up and making it easy for you. So take a good look at it next time. Does it give you enough information so you can discuss the issue thoroughly? If there's consistent gaps, then maybe it's good to look at what your board was asking of its senior administration. and making sure that you've been clear on what you'd like, what you'll need to make a decision. And then try to have all the pieces in place the first time. And remember, administration can't read your mind, so if you even need to write that down, that's fair. The opposite of that is having so much information that perhaps it's overwhelming and the issue leads you down a rabbit hole. Perhaps it's off topic or basing a decision on just a slight detail that came up. Perhaps that's not right either. So consider when you're asking information whether it's information that really makes a difference to the outcome. Too much extraneous information can take away from the issue at hand, not to mention that if you're having your administration spend all the time pulling together information that's irrelevant, it can be a waste. For some issues, there can be a lot of information and that you've asked senior administration to research. In this case, you may consider asking for a brief one-page executive summary. An outline could look like this: one sentence on the issue, a brief paragraph on the background or really a refresher, another on the current situation or the outcome of the research, or perhaps it's actually pros and cons, depending on the nature, and perhaps it's rather pros and cons, and then depending on the nature of the issue, you might ask senior administration to include a non-binding recommendation. This can help focus the question for debate quickly, and it might even help form a motion. Also, for those that need much more detail, they can look then through more of the research that's provided. So if you only need the executive summary, then that's fair. So assess the board meeting package next time and make sure that it allows you to know the material at the level that you need to ask questions. A quick example of what I mean is reading detail to the point that you're asking, if it's bus number 5 or 25 that does a pickup at corner X. That may not be relevant, but looking to see if the material can answer whether this decision will make progress toward your strategic plan objective on transportation, that's right on target. You might even want to consider a note in the executive summary to say what part of the strategic plan that it actually relates to. Now, my role is to govern. If you recall, I spoke about looking at the question from the right perspective, and I think this is a good place to start. If this is the one and only thing you remember from this webinar, this would be the place to start when you're looking for the right question. Think about a trustee's role of being that of governance and governance of the division. And when thinking over a question to ask, then weigh it against your role of governing versus, for example, a parent wanting you to step in into one issue that's far removed or what you have diligently hired your senior administration to do. But this begs the question that what precisely is governing? Let's look at that, and see if we can help you determine if the way or the level that you're looking at something is correct. I'll turn this off for a moment and then you can focus a little bit again on the questions exactly that you're looking at there. So looking at the key work of school boards is a way to bring focus to your questions. What is your bottom line? It's students and their learning. When you think about your questions, let this be one of your filters. But aside from that, there are 3 main groups of responsibilities for your board, and under these groupings, it's often a great starting point to remember that governance is the what and operations is the how. So questions might look like this. If you're thinking about leadership, here you may weigh questions against your vision or the achievement of your mission. There are some ideas noted here too that you can look at. If you're thinking about stewardship, that's really about monitoring and evaluation and involves questions that help you ascertain whether someone has lived up to the criteria against which they're being formally evaluated. So if you set the evaluation criteria in the first place, these questions should be fairly straightforward. Or then there's also relationship, asking whether a new policy providing for input from community members will bring what the board needs to promote student achievement, which is right there in the middle. So when framing your questions, think about it in those terms. Some other examples under leadership and advocacy may have you ask, what will support this program or direction direction will be lent to our plan for student achievement? It's then up to administration to figure out the how they will provide for that support. Or under relationship, are you asking questions around who is coaching the school sports teams? Or is your board setting up policies that support school volunteers? That might be the level that you're looking at rather than who's actually doing the coaching. If you know the material and you think about your role, then weigh your questions against what you're trying to achieve. That's really what this is saying. Ask, what difference did this make to kids and learning? Reflect on the overall picture or on it as a whole. Think about what the board's role is and that of staff. Or, as I noted before, is it a knee-jerk reaction to an external offhand comment from a parent? The second point of the second point at the beginning talked about looking at it from the right perspective. If you are well versed in what the perspective is, it will make asking the question a lot easier. Now, formulating the question to get what you need. Is your intuition conditioned to recognize the right questions? Your intuition is going to come from a number of places. There are some attributes or soft skills that you come to the table with. You are actually on the board because of your expertise or perhaps a specialty, or maybe your voters saw a soft skill like empathy in you. Maybe they see a workhorse that will delve deep and cover all the bases, or maybe it's your ability to see the big picture. Even to stay focused on an issue at hand, that's a soft skill. Whatever it is, assess that and then remember, play to your strengths and ask questions around those. You'll have colleagues on the board who are also going to be playing to their strengths, and they will be different from yours. You also have certain knowledge and skills that have come to us through, say, work or clubs or hobbies. Whether you have a financial background perhaps, or you're employed in the HR field, use those skills and knowledge and draw from your own data bank. And finally, there's the general life lessons, and everyone's are different. The experiences that we bring to the table. What do you know from the past? So here, dig deep and look down for the root cause of certain things. Look further than what is on the page and think it through with the consequences or different scenarios. The point is to trust these attributes and the attributes that really form your own intuition. From a more practical sense, if you want to test a direction that you've been taking, you might weigh questions against these 4 points. Whatever saying you relate to, for example, take a balcony view, see the whole forest and not just the individual trees, or take a look from 30,000 feet, all of those may be a useful way for you as a board to look at it. This goes back also to the beginning where I talked about what it is to govern: leadership, stewardship, relationship. So it's at that level that you should be framing your questions. Also plan for the future. As opposed to just looking at what you did last month or even last year, refer back to your strategic plan and see how the issue, or ask how the issue fits with what you expect in the future. That can be an easy question if you relate well to your vision, mission, your strategic plan. You can also look at, is this issue a priority? Does the question fit with your long-term goals? And then finally, remember the student. Once you have a priority or goal, remember to give it the litmus test and ask if it really does support student learning. And does it to the extent needed for the resources that you're actually thinking you're putting toward it? Are you putting too many resources toward it? How big a priority is it? Okay, so I'll come back up here and we're going to look a little bit further then. In the end, it's time to execute and decide when to raise the issue and how best to do it. So listen and confirm your observations or your understanding of the situation and context. So this reminds me of a board I used to work with a number of years ago, and someone who had only skimmed the board package. They were distracted at the table and hadn't listened to the questions his fellow board members had asked, and then proceeded to go on for on a 5-minute tirade before he and everyone else realized he was running the assessment against the previous year's budget instead of the current one. So it's a very valuable lesson to learn just from that. If nothing else, just stop and take a breath before asking. And then a big part, participate. If you're still feeling unsure of your contribution, think of it in this context. By raising an issue and questioning, you're helping your board really exercise diligence and exercise its leadership, stewardship, and relationship mandates. It can lead to something else. So you may trigger ideas and discussion from others, and it can lead to a stronger solution that you come up with arguments on how to support your decision. And look at the direction that you can take forward, and it helps you support it to your public. The discussion, it can also ensure that risk is managed through understanding and deliberate action, and not just through habit and the expedience of getting the question off or getting the motion off the table. So remember that also that combined wisdom of all members acting together, it forms a positive and diligent team, one that's really doing their job. So I'm going to move on to a few related areas that you may find are a helpful guide, I hope. These are some of the things to consider when a board is asking for information. Do you know what you need? So you can ask the right questions. Define your needs and be clear. As I said earlier, you can even write it down for administration, but leaving administration to figure it out and then telling them after that they got it wrong is not going to be helpful to anyone. So also define information parameters. If you want the executive summary, outline it so that, for example, do you want pros and cons? Do you want a recommendation? Do you need a summary of survey information? And then really consider need to know versus nice to know. When you consider that, also remember that level of detail some people need may be different compared to someone else's. However, if you find that you're asking for much more detail than anyone else, perhaps it's also useful to step back and ask yourself, is this really going to sway the decision I make? So in order to do that, you might ask yourself, why do I think I need this? If you can't come up with a good, reasonable response, then it's time to take a step back and really look at this. Is it need to know or nice to know? How much is it going to sway the decision that you make? Now, from that 30,000-foot level that I mentioned earlier, here's some questions that you might start, they might start moving you along in the right direction, or more specifically, to deal with the issue at the level that a board should be discussing it. So if you ask, why are we here? Why are we considering this issue? What do we believe and value about teaching and learning? And does that issue contribute to that? What legacy do we wish to leave as a school board? And then last, perhaps, what is our bottom line? These questions deal with something called performance accountability. If you think back to why you're here, your board's mandate of student learning and achievement, here's some measures for how your board are doing, just looking at those questions. These aren't the evaluation questions, but rather what you want to answer about your board's work. These are the objectives of establishing performance accountability. And then now let's go back to look what was outlined at the beginning. And you want to remember to prepare, observe, and understand. Take that deep breath and test the question against what you know to be true. Trust your intuition. if you understand the material well, and you should be able to recognize and isolate an issue you want to know more about, that's going to help you focus that question. And then you just staying focused and making sure that you're asking in a way so that you can get the answers you need, asking for information in a way that will help you decide. Sometimes rather than saying, I don't understand, you don't understand what I'm saying or asking, turn around and think of it in this way. Maybe I didn't ask it in a way that they could understand, or that they could give me what I needed to make a decision. So if it's a matter of communication, often the first place you need to actually look to is yourself. Say, did I ask it in a way they understood? If I've asked a long and detailed question, perhaps I needed to spell it out. Did they actually understand that I was expecting or had an expectation that they were going to bring information to the next meeting? Did they understand exactly what I was looking for in terms of the pros and cons, in terms of a recommendation, and that recommendation perhaps is non-binding, meaning that you will take the recommendation, but then of course it is for the board to consider and give the right answer. And really, all of this, you are looking for the entire team, the entire board, to then have the right information so that they can give direction. And then you'll see that I haven't actually outlined specific questions. And I think that's just, it's too difficult. We don't know. There can be just a myriad of 1,000 questions you could ask depending on what the actual issue is. But it's rather an approach to understanding the issues and situations so that you can define and then find your own words to ask the questions. So every situation is really different. And this is rather a way of thinking so that it will help you find the words. I focused on the mandate of a school board, what its obligations are, and what trustees will be judged on. And I talked about looking at your own attributes, your skills, your knowledge, your intuition. So remember that learn to play to your strengths, assess the issues and your responsibilities, and then if you prepare well, you can trust your intuition. So even when going through that board meeting package and you say, oh, here's a great question, always step back and say, is that really, I guess, at the level that we should be asking the question, and is it going to help us with our work and not administration's work? Although you could be asking administration just if they are comfortable that they have all the information so that they can look after the how. There's also some specific pointers that I gave on how to prepare or how to work with senior administration, keeping questions focused at the right level, and as I said before, looking at the what and not the how. So if you are well prepared, then trust that little inside voice that you are not making a fool of yourself at the table, and just speak up. It's much worse looking a fool over perhaps a couple of goofy questions than not asking a question at all. Your constituents, if you remember, have elected you to represent them and their interests. So at the very least, you can think about what they might want. They're expecting you to exercise that authority that they have given you at the board table. And so in this case, silence is not golden. So make sure that you do ask questions so that you are representing your voters. And to end on a little bit of a lighter note here, so however, there might be one instance where silence is golden, and that's in this situation when we'd now like to open the floor to shorter speeches disguised as questions. So if at the very least you do nothing else, then getting to the point is the one thing that you should strive to do. So I'll move on to this last one, and I see there are a couple of questions that came up, so and you can ask some more questions as I answer these if you like. But really, I guess keeping in the theme of this presentation, we will go through those. And once again, if you are watching a recording of the presentation and you have questions, feel free to contact me at the Manitoba School Boards Association. So the first question that I'm seeing here in this window is it seems, I guess, like an overly analytical way to go about questioning an issue. Can you elaborate on why we should use all these steps? Okay, so please understand that just like a good question, there's also a time and a place for these type of questions that I'm talking about here. This is when you're deciding something that's rather more complex. If you're deciding on perhaps changing the order of a meeting agenda, I'm certain that you won't go through something like all of these different steps. So this is for those questions that will move forward your strategic goals, that'll take them along. Something bigger that works towards student achievement, whether to divert resources from programming of the arts to sports, something of that nature. Remember that you're asking questions that will make progress and move your mandate along. Just like asking for too much irrelevant information, you should be wary of asking irrelevant questions. Okay, and so another one I'm seeing there is, can I outline again the headings that I mentioned for the strategic summary, or sorry, for the executive summary? So sure. These are the headings that I've used, and you know what, just as I talk about this, I'm going to click a couple of screens forward here, or go into the, I just remembered I have actually looked on this last area here. You'll see in the center section there's a document, and if you want, you can download that. It's on an executive summary and what it actually contains, or it's a template for that. So if you want to download, go ahead while I talk through this. So these are the headings that I've used, and as I said, it's to remember it is a one-page summary. So I talked about having issue, background, current situation, recommendation, or question. So you start with a brief, just a one-liner that tells you the issue, and you might also use this to formulate a motion on a question. Then you put in the background. It's a short paragraph, remember, or maybe another paragraph on maybe the current situation or the outcome of the research, or maybe that's where you're putting in the pros and cons, and then or considerations. These might be the major things that'll affect the decision. And again, these are just one sentence really that you're looking at. Then, and you can choose to do this depending on the nature of the issue, you might ask senior administration to include a non-binding recommendation, or possibly the last paragraph can contain the question about which you're making a decision. So this can focus the question for debate very quickly and provide the actual motion. So look over here, and that's just it. I had a couple of questions in there, but as I said before, you can always find me at the Manitoba School Boards Association. On this last page, you can see my email address there in red. Above that, you see a line section, and it'll show there the download that you can take on the executive summary. And because this webinar is being recorded, you can actually go back to our website, and looking at the page on webinars, it might go through trustee, I think it's services, trustee education, and then over on the left side, there's about webinars, and if you click there, it'll take you into a library of all of the webinars that I've given so far, and there's recordings of them. So you can just take a look at those if you feel there's anything you missed. And also, if you don't have a chance to download this executive summary that I've put here, then just send me a quick email, and I can certainly email that to you as well, or if you lose it or delete it. Anyway, I will leave you there. I'm planning to have one more webinar before we break for the summer, so that'll be in late May or early June. You can keep a lookout for information on that on our webpage, and hope you'll be joining us again. Thanks.